we go again. Welcome, Misha. How are you doing this time?
I'm doing okay. I'm just getting over getting sick. It's
Oh,
not
really?
COVID, I don't think. I think I just had a fever. But
Uh,
yeah. But you caught me like I almost canceled on you because
oh,
I didn't know if I was gonna be okay by today, but actually magically like today I feel okay, so I could start becoming a human being again. So that's nice.
that's good for you and fortunate for us. Perfect.
I haven't
Um,
eaten in 3 days, so that's gonna food.
yeah,
I might try food today. I remember liking that.
yeah.
I remember liking food, so maybe I'll try that.
Food is always good. So the other day we spoke primarily about guitars, about Jackson guitars, obviously. We
Mhm.
spoke a little bit about your studio and a couple of other things. And this time it's about my favorite topic because I love guitars, but I'm a sucker for amps. I love amps. Amps
Yep.
is most likely a bigger love for me than guitars. And you're a signature artist with Jackson, but you're also a signature artist with Peavey Electronics.
Yep. Yep. I
And
have the Invective with them.
so maybe a basic question. What are you looking for in an amplifier? What are the things that an amplifier 100% needs to have for you to be like, oh, I like that. I'm attracted to that kind of stuff.
You know, that's a tough question to answer and an easy question to answer. So it's tough because if there was any one amp that could do that, then I wouldn't have the stupid collection of amps that I have, right? And I'm sure you can relate to that.
Yeah, yeah,
Uh,
I guess so.
but the easy way to answer is it needs to have character.
Right.
There's a lot of amps I've played that I'd say are very good,
Hmm.
but that I don't walk away really remembering what they sound like or thinking about them. Like it needs to have personality. There needs to be something unique. And I've also heard amps have a lot of personality and are terrible. But
Yeah.
you need to have like a good character. And the interesting thing about an amp with good character and a telltale sign that it's a good amp is that you could put 5 different players in front of them who play completely different styles, who use varying amounts of gain or approach dialing in tones completely differently, and they will all get really good sounds from that same amp, and you'll be like, wow, what a versatile amp. It sort of lets the character of the player come through.
Yeah.
So an amp that has character and that can do that, I think is the ideal amp. That's what you want.
And okay, so that's more, yeah, that's more a characteristic description and not so much a feature focused thing. Like I need an amp with that feature. I need.
So on the feature side, I do like, I tend to be on the more fully featured side of things, but I do like to strike a balance. And I am aware that, like, if someone let me run wild with amp design, you'd end up with something that most people would never look at ever because it'd be too complicated. I'd put the whole kitchen sink in there. So it's good to have some balancing forces acting against that, because my instincts are just to put everything in there, and most people don't want that.
Okay.
And understandably so. I mean, like, I think an amp, generally you should be able to just set it to noon and it should just sound good from there, and you're tweaking from there.
Right.
So generally speaking, I mean, I'd like an amp, although I have bought a lot of amps that are single channel lately. I do prefer when they have at least 2 channels, like a good clean, and I find it's very rare, by the way, very, very rare to find an amp that has a genuinely good clean channel
Hmm.
and a genuinely good distorted channel, right? You usually find that, like, you're like, well, yeah, clean channel is not that great, but it's because the distortion, and like
Yeah,
that's
yeah,
always the
right.
compromise, right?
Yeah.
So with the Invective, I wanted to make sure that that was something that we addressed.
Yeah.
In fact, the clean channel was originally designed for a pedal steel amp.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so the clean channel on this amp is so legit that it was just supposed to be a clean amp, like a 1-channel clean amp.
Yeah,
Um,
I remember that Peavey has an amplifier especially for pedal steel stuff.
yeah. They and they have that market. I forget the player's name. He's very talented, but that is a market that they cater to.
Yeah.
And this was an amp that was this channel. It was tweaked a bit, and it's designed to fit the character of the amp. But I remember going to John Fields, the engineer, and I was like, look, like I want to see if we can do this, because I find it's so rare. You know, I couldn't really think of many amps that had genuinely a great distorted channel and a great clean channel, like where one would use both of those happily without feeling like they've been compromised in some way.
Right.
And I think that was achieved with the Invective, and it's actually a 3-channel amp, because you've got the crunch and lead channels are similar in character, I suppose, but very different in EQ. And like you know, the crunch channel has much more low end to it.
Yeah.
And it's not quite as much attack, but it's huge sounding, especially when you crank the amp. And then if you want those sort of more traditional djenty sound, then like, you know, the lead channel is more to your taste. There can be an argument for some people actually choosing the lead channel as their rhythm and the crunch channel as their lead for that reason. The other thing that I really like is having like something that has very complex harmonic mid-range to it. You know, the guitar is a mid-range instrument, and I think we've all probably played some amps that like sound aggressive and sound sort of impressive when you chug. When you play leads or play chords, it sort of sounds very flat, very two-dimensional. I've always liked these amps that sound three-dimensional when you're throwing like complex chords. All the notes are ringing, they're all interacting in a very musical way. That's very hard to put into words. It's a bit of an abstract thing, but you know it when you hear it. You know, I find like on those sort of amps, like pinch harmonics not only are easier to get, but they sound richer. They almost have their own harmonics to the harmonics. I also tend to like amps that saturate well, or where you can get saturation. So you can get a tight sound, but so much of the music I play and how I play guitar is like even just adjusting where I am placing my picking hand and palm muting on the bridge, right? Because you move it towards the neck just like millimeters, I'm sure, and it gets very, very tight. Move it towards the bridge, and you get this big open sound. And in that position, I want it to saturate. I want all that low end to just like kind of mess with each other, you know,
Right.
like all that gain to just get kind of yeah, I don't know what word to use other than just saturated. And there's certain amps that are very tight, but when no matter how much you turn up the gain, it'll still be tight in those scenarios.
Yeah.
And I just don't think that those amps ever sound quite as big. So and the cool trick,
the word ballsy comes to mind.
yeah, ballsy is good, but here's the thing: is like I don't think that an amp, especially in the mix, should have too much bass, right? Really low mids is as far as you should go, and that's probably going to get cut out in the mix anyways. But the saturation I'm talking about is happening at the level where even if you cut out the low end or whatever, you're still getting that effect. Right. And if it interacts with the bass, it'll still give you that sense of a huge guitar tone. So I'm also thinking in the context of the full mix, or how this would be then processed in a full mix. So yeah, I guess I have pretty high standards for like my ideal amp, because it needs to operate just as well at bedroom volumes or live stage volumes or in the studio or processed in a mix, right? It has to be able to excel at all of those things. So when we were designing the amp, I was testing it in all of those scenarios to make sure it was holding up, and we were tweaking it as necessary. Yeah, and the other thing actually is also wanted a really clean effects loop. I found like a lot of effects loops can really color the sound of the amp.
They do.
So I wanted to have twofold. One, because you know it's just good to have a clean effects loop. It's great to have an effects loop that doesn't impart any change to your sound. And then also, I'm such a fan of running modelers into tube power amps, you know? Like I love the Axe effects. I was like, I really want people who have an Axe effects, and I want to be able to run my Axe effects through the power amp and have this be the best sounding power amp for the Axe effects, you know?
Right.
So something that, again, is relatively neutral. It's not imparting too much of a character. And like, to give an example of the opposite, like, see my Mesa Rev G right here. Great amp. But man, that power amp, whatever you put through it will sound like a Mesa. You'll have that top and fizz, you know? So I was like, basically not that, you know? I want something that's very neutral, but still big, still has the size. And so we made the effects loops on the Invective so that they'd be very, I don't want to say transparent because it still has character, but it just doesn't interfere with the sound. Like if you're plugging a modeler and you will get the character of the amps come through, they will sound big and you won't get any weird quirkiness like fizz. It's a pretty neutral sound that you're working with. So all that was a lot of work. Yeah. There's still more features to cover, but I've been talking for a while.
So yeah, I remember the Invective came out in 2017, and I remember that because back then I was still working for a company you might know, Positive Grid. And,
okay, yeah,
yeah, and I was visiting the German Peavey distributor, and I saw this thing, and he said, "You can't talk about it; it's still like super secret." And but you can test it if you want. So I tested it out, and something, I don't know, something clicked and I said, there is some 5150 DNA in there. So when I talked this earlier today with Fred from Peavey, yeah, he told me obviously there is lots of DNA from that amp. So what do you like about this original model, and what did you take into the design of the Invective?
So it's interesting. The 5150. I wonder sometimes if there's just a cyclical nature to these things. I think about why the 57 and the vintage 30 are such popular mic and speaker combos, despite the fact that they're dirt cheap. You throw a $1,500 Neumann on it, it doesn't sound as good, you know. But it's because records had that, and so many metal records that I listened to that informed what I thought was good guitar tone was like a boosted 5150, you know?
Right.
And there's something about it where it just sits in the mix. I remember having this discussion very early on with a buddy of mine, a very, very good producer and engineer named Mark Lewis, who is like one of the biggest 5150 evangelists out there. And he's, you know, I think I just bought like a Diesel VH4 or something like that.
Oh, I have one. Good amp.
Yeah. Sorry, Diesel, right? But yeah, like I think I just got one of those, like, and had like some angles. You know, I'd like a lot of boutique stuff. He's like, that's all trash. I was like, what are you talking about? Like, it's a great amp, you know? He's like, yeah, maybe playing in the room and jamming or whatever, but dude, on recording, nothing beats a 5150. And I was like, what are you talking about? And he sent me, he'd obviously like, he just reamped the same thing through all these amps and sent them all to me. It was the most depressing thing because like yeah, the 5150 was the best. It sounded the best. There's something about the way that the upper mid-range cuts through the mix and the way it just sits in the mix. And I think I bought one right after that for like $600, like a used one for like $600. And I was just like, that's so disappointing. I just spent, you know, ungodly amounts of money on all these other amps just to find out that this like $600 amp was better for like whatever. I've always liked the archetype of that. Though I did find that it was a bit of a noisy amp, and you do have to boost it, you know, especially if you're tuning down or whatever. So we definitely took the DNA of it, but we tightened it up, we refined it a little bit to make it more modern. What I call, like, you know, what if the 5150 had been designed in 2020 or 2017 at the time, right?
Yeah.
And then we put a boost into the amp and a noise gate so that you don't, because I felt like, especially in the context that I'm using it, you're going to have those anyways. So might as well just have them on the amp. Sure, if you have your favorite pedal or whatever, you could still put them in front. But if you don't, or if it doesn't really sound that different, well, that's two less things you have to worry about and put in front of the amp. So it was just kind of like, what would a common sense 5150 sound that records just as well and works in the mix just as well, you know, and is maybe a bit more refined and less noisy, a little bit more suited to my style of music and modern metal, you know.
Right.
It's a hot rodded, but the DNA is definitely 5150. And I think some people have like kind of tried to use that as like some sort of knock against the amp. It's like, and there's only so many archetypes out there, you know.
Yeah.
And like, I feel like I picked a good one. I feel I picked the one that I wanted, you know.
Yeah.
So and it's good to be able to go to the guys that invented that archetype. So you know,
Yeah. 100%.
might as well use that. And yeah, just, you know, one of the big things that we tweaked that a lot of people don't think about is the output transformer. Makes massive differences. People spend so much time freaking out about tubes, and we did spend times, you know, experimenting with tube choices and all that stuff. But my God, the amount of difference that just the smallest changes on the output transformer, it was massive changes in sound, you know. So like that's what we spend quite a bit of time tweaking, and that I think is like on a different level than any 5150.
Yeah.
And that makes a huge difference in sort of like the high fineness of the amp, or the how refined it is and how clean it is, you know.
Yeah, it's I agree 100%. That's one of the things that Peter Dietzel told me very early on. It's like when we were talking about EL34s versus 6L6, KD88, blah blah blah, and he said like, yeah, it's all fine, it's great, it's gonna do some nuances, maybe it's gonna give you some more power, but if you change the output transformer, that's gonna massively change things around. So
yeah, and one thing that getting this better output transformer in allowed us to do was have the clean channel sound huge.
yeah,
If you so we made the clean channel so it would be like pristine, right? But even if, you know, you turn it all the way up, but if you turn the amp all the way up and you play a clean chord and you're standing in front of like a 412 cab, like you feel it in your chest. Like it is huge sounding. And interestingly enough, it actually makes it a really good pedal platform.
yeah.
So I'm a big pedal guy. I've got like my pedal board. So I just put my pedal board just into the clean channel of the amp. Just ignore all the high gain stuff.
Yeah.
Ignore the loop. Ignore everything, you know? And like, I'm like, that sounds way better than it has any right to, but it's because of that output transformer and how just amazing that clean channel is.
Yeah.
And then just for fun, we put another boost on the clean channel, which is not a tube screamer style boost. It's more of a, I don't know what circuit was used, but
Clean boost kind of.
Yeah, and it, well, so one of the things that the tube screamer does, which doesn't make it my favorite for a clean boost, is that it only runs at partial mix, right? It's not a full mix on it, so you will get some of the original signal. The one on the clean channel is not like that; it's full mix. So you are getting an actual. You're not hearing it of the clean sound like in parallel, which is a bit of a pet peeve of mine. So that's why we use two different circuits. And I actually think it sounds great. So if you want that slightly driven, chimey kind of, you know, sparkly driven to like, you can't get like a ton of gain out of it, but I just think it's got some great character. And that's actually the setting where when I was just jamming on the amp would be like that with the boost would be probably the setting I jammed on the most, just because it's very fun, you know?
Yeah. So obviously we spoke about amps that have, and there are not many amps out there like this that have a great clean channel and have a great distorted and overdriven channel. So maybe a handful that are like, okay, this setup is perfect.
Yeah.
When you worked with the R&D team of Peavey, it's like, what other things did you have to get maybe rid of or change up until you were at a point where you said, okay, that's it. That's that's the final thing.
So it was really more about dialing in the actual bass tones, and then not bass tones, but the sort of bass line sounds. But like, then after that, it was about features. What features could we get on this that would be non-invasive? And the one thing is actually funny enough, talking about the Dietzel VH4 is that amp, I'm sure scares a lot of people away because you look at, you're like, that is too much. And I was like, we can't have that. I want features, but I want this to still look accessible to the average person. You know, I want them to see one in a store and be like, oh yeah, let me try that. Not like, it's a little too much amp for me. which, you know, is the reason I love the VH4, because I was like, yes, give me all the controls, you know, the more the better. But like for most people, I think it can be intimidating.
Yeah.
So we found a way to like sort of make it as accessible a panel and putting some controls on the back. One thing I noticed that I was doing was I was, you know, putting like my Strymon pedals in the loop, like my Timeline and my Big Sky. And I was like, man, it'd be really nice if I could just plug these in, you know, into power. So we included like 2 power supplies on the back.
Oh yeah, right.
So that you could do that. You could plug those in. And then the idea is, because the amp has MIDI control on, and this was the other thing, I worked with John Farah on all the MIDI magic and all that, and he did such a great job there. But like you can it comes with a controller, but it's actually technically a MIDI controller. And you can activate the loops, and there's 2 loops and they're run in sequence. So you can run like a delay in one, a reverb in the other one, that one feeds into the other.
Right.
And active remotely. So the idea being that, like, if I wanted to play a show, I could just have my Invective foot switch in front of me, switch everything on and off. You can even make presets. You could have like clean with reverb and delay, and then go straight to like, you know, super boosted gated rhythm with one switch, and it would do everything for you, you know? And I thought that was just pretty handy. And that was from me just jamming around and figuring out stuff like that. So yeah, you know, having things like a lead boost on the back as well, in case you need more. And the idea is that the pedal board has 2 modes, like either you're controlling all the things individually, or you create presets, and then you can, you know, that's more like a live set scenario where it's like, okay, you know, this is my clean, this is my distorted, this is my lead, this is my tight rhythm, my loose, you know, whatever. We really tried to design it so it would be as complete as possible for any scenario. Obviously, like if you run a lot of pedals, then you may want something else, but I think for a lot of people, it would cover all the bases.
So the Invective Mini head just launched, or well, according to what I heard from Peavey this morning, the first units on the way to Europe, and it's great because I mean it's a handy, very convincing kind of format, and especially with lots of people being at home right now, and you know who wants to you know get into the session room and get their like 120 watts huge head and take it home. So but I was wondering, were there any kind of things that you have to sacrifice because of the form factor? Because I mean this thing has lots of knobs, but still the 120
there's so much space. There's only so much space you have to work with.
Yeah,
we had to sacrifice a few things, but John Fields and I worked on it, and he really got so much more in there than I thought we would be able to get away with. He was really clever with that. I think there's certain things, like for example the boost and the gate, they're switches now instead, so they're fixed settings.
Yeah,
the idea was like, it's that or nothing. It's like, well, you might as well get a fixed setting. And again, if you have a boost or gate you prefer, just use that. But if you don't, they're in the amp. And I think we dialed them in to be kind of middle of the road, like, you know, crowd pleasing areas. We had to cut down on the controls. What shocked me is that, I mean, it's a 25 watt amp, so there will be differences. But like, at lower volumes, within that 25 watt range, you know, it sounds so similar to the big head. It's amazing. Where you will see the difference is like at volume and like low end response. Obviously, that's what wattage. Everyone thinks wattage is loudness, and I always have to tell them it's not. You know, and what you will get is low end response. And with an amp that has as much low end as the Invective has, a lot of low end on tap. You know, so it's like, you know, that is where 120 watts versus 25 will make a big difference. But yeah, like for recording, as you said, you know, most people don't want these big amps. I want the big amp. That's why we start with a big. These are all passion projects. They're all selfish projects. I'm just like, I just want to do the thing I want. It's not always the smartest. It's not always like the best financial decision. the best financial decision is probably like the mini heads, because people really like them, and I think they're really cool. Like I have mini heads, and I've owned many mini heads, and I like them a lot. I totally get it. But I figure you start with the big one, then you introduce the small one after, and you sort of try to get the best features from it. And I have to say I'm really impressed. I didn't think that it would sound as close to the big boy as it does.
Yeah.
So I think if you get your hands on it, you've tried the big one. I think if you get your hands on the small one and try it, I think you'll be pleasantly surprised. I'm curious to see what you think. But I think just on its own and at that price point, it's a pretty unbeatable package.
Yeah. Speaking of the features the amp has, I mean, there are things like a tight switch, gate, and such things. So do you still think that there's a certain necessity to work with clean boost, overdrive style pedals in front of it, or
it's just if you want the control, and I say this all the time, but it's no less true today than it was the first time I said it. We're in the industry of wants, not of needs. I don't need any of this crap. Okay? I don't need any of this stuff, but I love it. It's the experience. Do you know how many delay pedals I have? Do you know how many tape echo units I have? One is already overkill, but I have 4. Why do I have 4? Because they're all a little different to me, Okay. And all my boost pedals are different. I remember having like a bunch of tube screamers that were the same, and they were all different. Now I have obviously like my precision drive. So if you're going to put something in front of it, I recommend this because that's what I use in front of everything. But it's all flavors. So like you don't need that stuff. But one, if you want more control, then especially with that, on the big head you have controls for level and tone, and you can actually control some aspects of the gate and whatever. On the small head, not so much. But I'm imagining that a lot of the customers for this amp probably don't even have those pedals to begin with, so it's saving them the trouble of having to go and get them. And if they're like, oh, that's kind of cool, maybe I should get a pedal where I have some control over that, then then I apologize for getting you into that rabbit hole. It never ends. It never ends.
And also with tape echoes, the thing is, it doesn't matter how many you have. What matters is, do you have a technician that can repair it?
Oh man, yeah. I have a guy in Maryland who's a wizard who I'm not even allowed to talk about. I can't tell you his name.
Okay.
Because the shop that hires him does not want people to fire because they're like, they find out about him, he's not going to work on anything. But he fixed up my this is my favorite one.
Oh,
my EP2 Echoplex. This thing, I've used this on the last 2 records, like everywhere. I also have this Echo Fix tape echo here.
That's the Australian one, right?
The Australian one, yeah. Because I figured it'd be good to pair that with my actual RE301. I think this one's supposed to be somewhere between a 201 and a 301. But I've got an RE301, and then I've got here my T-Rex replicator as well.
Oh yeah.
Pretty cool because it's the only tap tempo tape echo. I think.
I don't think there's no other.
I don't think there's another one. And the modulation on it sounds really good. So so that's why I need 4.
Yeah. Simple as that.
That's why I need 4.
So effects, using effects with your amplifiers or with amplifiers in general, are you putting stuff in the loop? Are you one of these guys that says, okay, modulation, delay, reverb strictly in the loop, or does it go in front of the amp sometimes? Or
no, it's different. They're very different. I'm very picky about that, but there's purposes. I will put delays in front of the amp to get that sort of post rock effect. That you trem pick in front of it, and you get that it sounds like a long, almost
dry kill thing.
Note, what?
Huh?
What did you say?
The dry kill thing? You mean?
I don't know dry kill. I would say it's like dredge, if you know dredge.
Yeah, like it's like if it's well, dry kill just means that you don't have your original dry guitar signal anymore. You just hear the delays and
Well, this is not a dry kill. You're talking about like as an effect. So no, this would not be a dry kill thing.
Okay.
But it's interacting with it. So you're hearing the note, but then you're hearing a trail against the distorted repeats. It's like sort of feeding into itself. So I like that. I use that a lot. Reverb works. It can be used as a bit of an effect there, but sometimes it can be a bit much. But I'll experiment with that. So like that will be for that effect, but then obviously if I want sort of more traditional delay and reverb, then that has to go after the gain stage, so it ends up in the loop.
Right.
But there's no necessarily like rules. I think if I have an idea of what exactly I want, I know how to get that. But if I'm like, oh, let's try this out, let's see what this sounds like here or that sounds like there, you know, then I'm happy to play around. Probably won't do anything silly like, you know, throw this in the loop of an amp, you know, that would be terrible. And people have done that and been like, why does this sound terrible? It's like, this is for the front. This is always for the front.
People have done that.
It's like, I was gonna make an inappropriate joke, but I shouldn't make an inappropriate joke. We'll just leave it at that. But anyways, just for the front. But yeah, like I think with these amps and with amps and recording in general, like so much about it has to do with experimentation. So you know, just trying out. It's what I love about it. It's like how tactile it is. Oh, let's try this order out, you know, and just keep playing around. You're like, oh, wasn't expecting that sound. That's kind of cool.
Right.
And that's why I have way too many pedals, or that's at least how I sleep at night.
So then, yeah. So maybe last question. That's a little bit less about, okay, you got to experiment with it. How do you control the stuff? You obviously there's this foot switch that works as a MIDI foot switch with the Invective 120. But are you using this, or are you using a looper? A looping system with your pedals and then control everything via MIDI? How do you go about it?
In what context, though?
If let's say you play with your amp and you have a couple of pedals in the loop and you have a couple of pedals in front, do you have some kind of an effects looper to control all that together with the amp, or is it just
you could do that. You could have it send MIDI control. There's a way to like use like a gig rigger or something like that. Like if I was using, I really wanted to get something like that going. Actually, I got vetoed by the band because they were just like, it's so much work and so much stuff to bring.
Yeah.
We use Act Effects. We actually use the Invective as like the power amp for our stage sound, but that's about all I was able to get away with because it just creates so much work for our crew. And it means that when we fly overseas, we'd have to use the fly rig. It creates so much logistical trouble. Right. But my dream was to have what you're talking about, like something like a gig rig or something like that, where you have that being the actual control to the amp that would control the pedals there, because there would be a bunch of pedals in front and there'd be like a bunch of pedals in the loop.
Right.
And like you could sort of just control it all with MIDI. And actually, it would be one step further because this is what we do live. We actually have our laptop doing all of our changes for us.
Yeah.
So that way we don't have to, you know, tap dance or anything like that, and we can stand wherever. We're completely wireless ears, wireless guitars. You can stand wherever you want. That's why the advantage is with the Axe Effects, fairly easy to program. So we could do that, but we would have had to reprogram our entire set and song list with that. Which again, why I got vetoed, but that was the dream, and yes, it's absolutely possible to do that. And I think it would sound better. It would definitely sound better to me, and definitely sound better in my ears. The question is, would it sound that much better to people in the audience to where all that extra work is worth it for everyone else in the band and the crew? I was like, that's where I was like, I don't know, But that if I had my way, that's the way that we would be doing it, because I think it sounds fantastic. And God, every time on tour, since we have this and we use it as the power amp, every now and then we'll just, you know, plug just straight in the front at sound check and just crank it. And I was just like, oh God, it sounds so good. It sounds so much better. But yeah, it would just be a lot of work to get it going. So yeah, you know, for now, we'll stick with what we have. But to anyone who dares do that, I'm very jealous if you can get that going, because it does sound phenomenal.
Yeah, it does. Yeah, I mean, one thing is how the audience is receiving it, and I guess the other part is how you feel on stage. You know, with that moving air behind you and being in control of that stuff. But yeah, as you said, it's a logistical.
It's more complicated than that too, because I have in-ears, so I'm not really hearing the amp unless I take a thing out, and even still, our front of house guy does not let us run that much stage sound because it's firing at him.
Yeah.
So we run a lot of side fills, and then it doesn't matter that much because they're not very high fidelity. It's just more like you're hearing a little bit. It's a bit of a complicated dance. And this is where, like, you know, the things that I would love don't always make perfect sense, because it's more than just what I want. You know, you have to factor logistics and costs and time and all those things. But, you know, if those things were no object, 100%, that's the rig I would be using. Yeah, without a doubt. And, you know, I designed the amp to be capable of that. Like, there's nothing this amp can't do. There's nothing that would catch a periphery set out or anything. Like, it could do any sound. Especially with the pedals I have and whatever, it could do any sound that we required. So that wouldn't be the limitation. It's all the boring stuff that is.
All right. Misha, thanks again for carving out the time talking to us.
It's always a pleasure talking to you.
Huh?
It's a pleasure talking to you, because you're just a full-on nerd. So we could just have nerdy conversations. And I know that talking to a kindred spirit. I'm not being
100%. So obviously the Invective MH is about to hit Europe, and we're hoping that it's going to be a great success over here as well. And until the next time, stay healthy and all the best.
All right. Thanks so much. Bye.